Hello and welcome to the Week 4 lab. As I tried to make it clear, there is not an assignment this week, just a lab. One of the reasons I did that is this might go really straightforward for you, and you might spend some time having to iron out some syntax errors. There's also a lot that's happening in this lab, so giving you a little bit of a break in the workload and just also making sure that you have the time to get this lab together, because this lab, in the process of completing it, you're going to put together some things that are going to be reusable for the remainder of the course. And there's some things that if you encounter problems with this lab, that you're really not going to be able to proceed any further in the course. So make sure that you do a good job with this. So this lab has a lot going on. It's kind of like week 2 in that it's not it's a bunch of pieces kind of intermixed together, and it's hard to separate it into its individual pieces. If you want a greater discussion of any of the concepts that we're handling here, like sticky data or connect scripts or inserts, there are individual videos for those. Now the nice thing about this, it's kind of a difficult assignment. It's intimidating, especially the first couple times you do something like this, the whole getting started with databases part of the course. The good news is that it should work for you. If it's not working for you, it's because you are making mistakes. If you've got XAMPP up and running, if you've got a web host, the techniques I'm going to show you will work. Right? And if they don't, it means that you're doing something wrong. And that wasn't the case with XAMPP. In the world of an XAMPP installation, it's entirely possible that you clicked all the right buttons and it didn't work. But in this assignment, if it doesn't work, please understand that it's your mistake, and it's just a matter of debugging. So let's talk about the lab. So you're going to create a simple form. The form's going to have 3 fields. It's going to have a text box for the name, an option select structure for something else, and it's going to have a salary on it. It's right, just 3 kind of arbitrary things. We're going to pass that information around with the get method, and we're going to use not empty to check for the data. In the past, we've used isSet, and isSet makes a lot of sense to use in most contexts, but the reason we're going to use empty here is because we're going to be using sticky data. So sticky data is probably a new term to you. That's one of the things we're talking about this week. If the data is not present, we're going to display relevant error messages. And so this, through here, really, so that is just like week 3 stuff. I can't highlight it worth anything. Sticky data is new, and it's going to take some work to implement that properly. It adds nice polish to your form, and just these 2 lines right here are the only new things. Now the thing is, those are just they're going to involve some unusual syntax, so that's where you might have some problems there with these last 2 bullets, I would think. So, I've talked enough, so let's go and have a quick look at the form. Here's the form, and so I styled it up. You don't have to style it up. Here's my first text field for the name, here's my second one for department, and here's my third one for salary, and a submit button, and a footer. Right beyond that, just has to be valid, and that's all I need. You don't need to style your form. This could be absolutely just black text on a white background with no alignment, and I don't have a whole lot to say about that, but it's never a bad idea to create a more visually appealing product. Anyways, moving on. Let's have a look at the code now. So, the first 37 lines of this are all PHP, so you know by now that's kind of how I like to do things. Block of PHP at the top, then my valid HTML down here, so from 39 on. I've got a little bit of a CSS here. If you had no CSS at all, that would be completely fine. Nothing about this project requires CSS, very much unlike the checkerboard, which was absolutely had to have CSS. This, I don't really care about your presentation, but I think if you probably would agree that putting a couple minutes into the presentation makes it look so much better. It's probably worth your time, but I'm not giving you credit for it. And here's the body of the page, not real big, a little div, which you don't need. And here's my form. Right? So it's got a text box called name. It's got a select option structure for department. I made up 3 departments. Do whatever you want to do there. I don't care. You don't have to do departments. It really doesn't matter to me. And a salary. I just wanted some kind of a drop down here. And that's the HTML. We don't need to talk about that a whole lot more. Let's go look at the PHP, and we're going to get straight into sticky data. So the first thing you see is a variable called out, and it's set to just an empty string. You could probably guess what that's for. That's going to be used for output on the page. More specifically, those are going to be error messages. if they exist. If they don't exist, then it remains an empty string and I still display it, but it's nothing. These variables here are things I'm going to use for the sticky data on the form. So you probably might not know what sticky data even means. I'll show you what it means in a minute here and how to implement it. But you're basically going to need these, and they're going to be used to spit out output on the actual HTML of the page that may or may not exist. And that's why they look a lot like that, because this out variable is going to be HTML, which may or may not exist. So let's get into the data validation part of this. So we're doing very granular data validation. It's not uncommon to have just one big string of like ands or ors, something to the effect of if is set get, right? So if is set name and is set depth and is set salary. You'll see programming like that all over the web. The problem with writing it like that is that you can't detect what one of the pieces of information was a problem, if that makes sense. The only way you're going to be able to do a very specific error message or even sticky data is to look at each one of the fields individually. Now, it's painful to me. It hurts to think that I had to write that much code to validate 3 variables, but if I'm going the sticky data route, this is kind of what I have to do. So I use empty versus isSet. So isSet just kind of looks up at the URL and it says, hey, is there anything in the URL that says name equals? And even if you left it blank, that would pass isSet. And I'm telling you that's fine most of the time. But because we're going the sticky route, I went with not empty. Not empty is actually going to make sure that it's not just like a blank field. So if it's not empty, I get the thing. Otherwise, I concatenate onto that error message, name is missing. Right? Notice I'm able to reference the actual field name if I do it like that. Then I head on down to a completely unrelated if, because it's unrelated, doesn't have anything to do with that one. Check for department. If it's there, I get it. Otherwise, I concatenate onto my error. Then I check the salary. If it's there, I get it. Otherwise, I concatenate onto my error. Everything below this, and so remember I was kind of making a big deal out of the SQL part of this, saying, man, that's going to be pretty hard. That's all the SQL you're going to do. I just want to explain it thoroughly. We're not there yet. All right, so this is some sticky data. Let me show you how this whole thing works. So I save this, and let me load up that page that I showed you earlier, and we'll show you how it functions currently. So let me wipe out that. I can't leave that blank just because of how I wrote it. If I log in, all right, that's not a very appropriate message. It should say something like submit or insert. But if I press that, oh, God, okay, I didn't mean to make that mistake. Whenever you do something like that, it means the action on your form is busted. And my action on my form says lab4 insert, so let me debug that. Sorry, I don't like making mistakes, but I think it's good for you to see them. If we had a face-to-face class, you'd see me make mistakes constantly. Oh, .1, what the heck is that? No. Like I said, when you press insert, or whatever this button says, and it goes to a page which is not found, it's because the action of your form doesn't correspond to an actual script. Anyways, just kidding. Let me reload that. Head back to the form. Alright, so it looks like this. I insert nothing. Oh, okay, so the other thing I need to do, and I did mean to leave this remaining, there should be an error message which is happening. Remember this out? I never spit that out, so let me do that maybe right here. So I'll show you that process again. I bust into PHP and out of PHP just very briefly for no reason other than to echo out that variable which was called out. I put it in double quotes because I had big ideas a second ago, but I changed my mind. Okay, so if there's an error message, I spit it out right there, and I just want to show you what's happening. It's kind of weird. Like, there's no perfect way for me to tie this all together until we get to the end. But you can see things are missing. Now I'm telling you that what's going to happen in the end here is I'm going to take those things and I'm going to shove them into a database. And so they all need to be there, and they're not there. You can see names missing, salaries missing, departments not missing. You can kind of see what happened up here in the address bar. You see how name was not there, so it failed. And department was set to add, so it didn't fail. So there's that. Let me show you where the sticky data comes into play. So let's say you've all done this on a form where, let's say there's 20 fields, right? And you filled in 19 of them, and you forgot to do your state or your zip code. Some forms on the internet will do this effect, which is, hey, you had some data missing, you need to enter all of the data again. Sticky data is when everything that you actually entered gets re-entered on the form for you. And that's an excellent level of polish. I'm all set up for it. So what I need to do is I need to take these variables, which got set, presumably, and put them down here in the inputs. So if you did enter a name, I'm going to do this. I'm going to write a value attribute. And in that value attribute, so I just kind of put it together like a empty quotes like that. This is kind of my technique. And then I just bust right into PHP. So I open and close PHP tags right there. And all I do is echo out that variable called name. So if it wasn't submitted, it's just going to have like a blank value, right? That default. If you did enter a name, then the name's going to be pre-populated there, which is helpful. I can't do anything here, really. Well, ultimately I could, but it would be quite a bit more difficult, so I'm not going to. I'm just going to pre-populate those text boxes, which seems like it makes sense to me. So value, empty quotes, jump into PHP. I know I didn't do that right. And jump out of PHP and echo out the thing that you want to echo out, which is salary. And I'll show you how this works. So I make my changes. Now I head to this page. So I'm going to put Ken in here, and I'm going to leave the salary blank, and I insert, and see that didn't work perfectly. That's an interesting one. I had forgotten that was going to happen. Or actually, well, I'll look into that. There's two reasons that could have happened, but notice that Ken is pre-populated. You've all seen those forms with a bunch of fields, and when you lose information, it's always frustrating. So what is the problem? I have two ideas. So I called it salary. Oh, what the heck? Yeah, I didn't call it salary. That will do it. Yep, that should fix things. I do a little bit of copy and pasting. I do more copying and pasting, and that's what you get. It's just an empty string. I do more copying and pasting than I should. I hate copying and pasting because I know it's a great way to make a bunch of mistakes, but in a world where my data entry skills and just typing ability are severely compromised, I ended up copying and pasting a lot of things. So that's sticky data. It doesn't really pay a lot of dividends here in such a small form, but on a large form, it's pretty helpful. And that's what I mean by sticky data. So my salary's 10. I insert. Now the way this is written, it's going to be sticky either way, and that's fine. So that's sticky data. Now on to the next part of this. Alright, so I got these variables. If they exist, I set them. Otherwise, they're initialized to nothing. And so the other part of this is here's where I start getting into the SQL part of things. So so the next step here is just all I've done so far is detect whether they're here or not, and I'm putting them down in the inputs. Now what I need to do is I need to connect to my backend database, and I need to insert those things into my database. So, step 1 looks exactly like this. This is what you call a connect script. I have a video on it. So I create a variable, and you can call it whatever you want to call it. A lot of people call it DBC, some people call it con, because it's a connection. DBC stands for database connection. It doesn't matter what you call it. You probably just want to be consistent. And so I set that equal to the result of whatever this function returns. The function is called MySQL connect. As I talk about other times, there's also a function called MySQL connect. Don't ever use anything that doesn't have an I in it. And you also notice right here that Notepad++ recognizes that, but not that as a keyword. It's just the way it is. You want to use the I functions. There's another way of doing this, but this is the way we're doing it for now. So the arguments that you're going to put in here is localhost. You're always going to do that. This is a username, this is a password, and this is the name of a database. So this is really not negotiable. I'm telling you, if you're running this locally in XAMPP, then sure, localhost is fine. And just the first time you do this, go ahead and just put in root, and then go ahead and put in empty quotes. That's how your XAMPP is configured. But you just need to understand that when you put this thing on your live web server, that's not going to play. Like you're not going to have a root with no password on your live host. I'm just showing you the first time you ever create a connect. If I want to do the laziest thing I can do, that'll work. You should set up users on your local XAMPP. Now I talk about this a little bit in the weekly lecture. You need to set up XAMPP. You need that to mirror your you need your XAMPP database to mirror the one that you have on your live web host. I'm going to do a video on that rather than get too crazy with it. So for now, I'm just writing something that's going to work only locally in XAMPP. And you got to watch the videos and see what I mean by this needs to change. So on your real web host, you'll need to create a real database named something, not that. And you'll need to create a real user and a real password. And then you'll have to go in and set that up in XAMPP. I just talked about it for like 3 minutes, which is probably a waste of time because there's going to be a video on it, but I'm telling you, this should work for the purposes of this, what we're doing right here. So the only thing that's negotiable is that. This is good for XAMPP. Let me show you what I mean. This or die thing, so how that works is if like this user or name or password or database doesn't exist, then you're going to get caught in this chunk and it's going to spit out bad connect. Now this right here, this is a total hack thing I did. But I just do it to prove to you that it works. So let me go jumping around. This is going to be hard to follow, but it's the best I can do. So here's my PHP admin. Here's that database. You remember when I said kswartwoe 233p? That's the database I'm connecting to. And that user that exists, that root with no password, that's just the default super user on XAMPP. So at some point, I had to go in here and I had to create a table. Now I talk about that in the lecture for the week, but more or less creating a table kind of sort of comes from here and here, and then I create whatever table I want. And so when you create a table, there's only one user that has access to it by default, and that's that root with no password. That's what I'm saying, just create a database and then you can connect to it pretty easily using that script. So you're gonna have to do that. Let me show you a little bit of how this actually works. So let's say like I go root or something, right? Like that's a bad login, just to show you what a failure looks like. So that's going to be a failure, and I'm going to get caught in a bad connect, and I'll show you how this works. So if I go back to that page that I was looking at a minute ago, and I refresh it, that is what a die looks like. So it threw an error here, and I get a little bit of gibberish just kind of spitting out, and that bad connect, right? The bad connect is literally what I told it to do. Let me show you a really good piece of advice. So you don't really want to just shoot out something like that. What I always like to do is I go bad connect. Actually, I lied. I was kind of getting ahead of myself. For now, I'm just going to leave it at that. It's pretty hard. It's non-trivial, certainly, to actually see why it didn't connect. But I'm telling you, if you go localhost and you set up your database correctly, this shouldn't be rocket science. You might have trouble if you're actually creating a user or something, but root, no password, name of the database, make sure it exists, and localhost. And when you're setting up your database, set it to localhost. So this thing right here, the whole reason I put that there is just to make you happy. You being the person this is the first time you've ever done connected to a database. That just proves to you that we actually connected. I know it works, but I'm just telling you, if you don't have any output happening, then you won't know that you connected. But I'm telling you that you can see that output comes from line 29. If you get to line 29, then that means that you did not die on line 27. But a functional web page should not have messages like that happening. That's just the only thing I can do to try and show you that your connection actually worked. Alright, so that's a connect script. Not a ton of fun to write the first time, and you can manage to mess it up, but that's how it is. I mean, there's just not more to it. I just have taught this class quite a few times, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen people have trouble right there, so kind of be careful. I'm happy to try and help you, but it's one of the things that I have a hard time supporting you on as well, because this line is relatively straightforward. The problems usually lie somewhere in here, and that's just something that you usually mess up on the back end. Alright, so the next part of this is I create a variable called whatever I want to call it. I called it SQL. Sometimes people might call it query, and this is just raw this is just valid SQL wrapped inside double quotes. Notice a convention I'm going with. So SQL keywords, I write them in caps, and a lot of people do that. It doesn't matter, they don't have to be in caps, but it just kind of makes it easier to read. So insert into person these three fields. these three values. So it's going to insert an F name of Ace, L name of Guy, country of Netherlands. That's just what it's going to do. This right here is just a string. There's no processing that happens. This is just valid HTML, hopefully. Or sorry, valid SQL, hopefully. Now this is where the magic happens, if you will. So I create a variable called result. This is kind of a hard one to explain. You're going to understand what result is used for next week. This week you're just going to have to trust me that it's something. So this is where I store the result of this function call. This function call is what processes this query. MySQL query is definitely not a hard thing to write. Just MySQL query. First thing you pass it is your database connection. I don't know what you called it, right? You already did that earlier. It should already exist. And then you pass it that SQL. And if that SQL is valid, then it'll work. If this SQL is not valid, then it won't work. And so that won't work is this, or die. And so I want to show you a cool trick. It's a lot of people do this, but it's something that I kind of swear by. So you're going to want to just write bad query. I know you will, because you will. Let me do a bad query. So if I go like persons, right? There's not a table called persons. Let me show you the thing that I'm interacting with. So remember this database, 233p? Here's that person thing. You see it's got a name, L name, country. I don't have to worry about the ID because that auto increments. But persons is not a table. So when I try and run this thing, how does that pot? Did I not refresh? I'm trying to figure out why that worked. Shouldn't have worked. Nice insert. What did I not? Oh, I didn't save this. All right, so now I wrote, that's invalid SQL, right? Because I'm trying to insert into a table which doesn't exist. Any mistake that you have in your SQL is going to throw an error here. Let me show you what an error looks like. So I go here, I refresh, and I get bad query. Now that's kind of helpful. That tells you that you died right here. Now also, I want to tell you there's this inclination I've seen with students. They always write or die, bad query, bad query, bad query. You want to have different or die messages so you can tell where it died. But hey, better yet, do this for sure. I write bad query, and then I spit out that little piece of SQL. Now, this is very useful because if you have mistakes in your statement right here, you'll see them right there. Show what I mean. This is just a far better way to debug. I go here, I refresh, and so it says bad query, and then I get to see the SQL. And so here's kind of a tip. You could literally copy this if you wanted to, and you can head over to phpMyAdmin. You could click on the SQL tab. You could paste your junk right there and process it, and it says table persons doesn't exist. Right, so in a world where you are having a hard time debugging your SQL, this is the only tool that you have available to you. And so I could fix it here, and I realize, oh, okay, that seemed to be the fix. And then I go here. Now, more often than not, you can debug it on your own. Sometimes when you echo it out right here, which is kind of what's happening, you'll see just an egregious error in your syntax. Now, this right here is just static variables like Ace, Guy, Netherlands. Now, let me prove to you that that's working. Well, actually, here's how I set this up. It either dies or it says nice insert. So let me show you that again. So I refresh, and it says nice insert, so you know it worked. And at this point, I stop playing around, and I remove that. Now you might be wondering, why are you doing Ace, Guy, Netherlands? Well, let me kind of show you a few things. So I jump back here. I want to show you that they're actually going into the table. Where's 8? How many rows are in here? A lot. I'm going to go to the very end. There's an Ace, Guy, and a Netherlands. You can see there's like 86 people in here or something. So it actually got inserted, which is kind of cool to see. But let me make this more functional, because there's no reason to just keep doing that. Here's what you do want to do. Instead of Ace, we want to do name. Instead of Guy, we want to do dept. And instead of Netherlands, we want to do salary. Something like that. At this point, you probably realize that these fields don't even roughly, right? Like F name is name, L name is department. So this insert kind of doesn't match up with the table at all. I was just kind of being lazy and just dumping things into a table that I didn't want to create. But let me show you how this works now. So that would yield more meaningful results, because now you're actually going to be inserting the stuff from the form into the table. The way I had it written before, I just kept inserting the same garbage. Now this is kind of garbage, right? Because there's no department in there, and well, like the data is fine, but the table doesn't really correspond to the fields, which is not really a terribly important part of it. So notice now what I'm doing is I'm grabbing the data and I'm inserting the data dynamically into the table. Oh, let me prove to you that it works, because I haven't done that yet. It's a hard thing to prove. That's the thing, right? When I said there's interconnected parts. So do Ken sales 10. I insert. There's no error messages, so that probably means that it worked. But the only way to check is I want to see Ken sales 10 in my table, and I'm trying to think what the best way to do it is. Click on persons, or go to the end, and I hope that I see Ken sales 10 in there. I have like 10 rows of Ace Guy Netherlands, which doesn't really make any sense here, but you can see that what I did is I processed the information from that form and I inserted it in the table. And now next week we will work on pulling information out of that table. But for now it's pretty awkward in that, like, the only way that you can verify that it's working is by the lack of error messages, which I guess makes sense, but it is kind of unsatisfying. If you want to prove to yourself that the insert's actually happening, well, you're going to have to go view the table in PHPMyAdmin. So there's one last exception. So one more thing that I do need to talk about in this assignment. It's completely functional at this point. So we're inserting rows into our table, but there's one part of the instructions. Let me point back to that. Those are here. So we've met all of these objectives. The only thing we haven't done is this create a table script. Now, this is one that you may or may not appreciate this week. So when we created our table, you actually never saw me create the table. It was just created on the back end, and that's where all my kind of weird inconsistencies happen. Now, by inconsistencies, I mean this part right here. Right? Like, those are the field names in the table, and those are the names of the variables that I'm inserting. These can be whatever. These must correspond to the table. They don't match up. I've kind of pointed at it a couple times. So what I need to do is I want to show you what a create table script looks like. Now, the reason this is useful is that this table that you're inserting things into on your flash drive, or sorry, your XAMPP installation, that same exact table needs to get created on your web server. And so oftentimes the easiest way to do that is just to write a script for it. So I'll show you how that works. So before the insert, let's just ensure that this table exists in the first place. So that's going to look like this. And so I'm going to create a variable called SQL. Notice I have 2 of them. It's okay. Every time I want to do a SQL query or a command, I just keep overriding that variable. And so I'm going to do a big old create table script. So I'll say create table if not exists. And so the table is going to be the name of the name of the table is going to be next, and so the table is going to be called person. This is just the handwritten equivalent to using that PHP admin console. You might think this is harder, and it kind of is, but the cool thing is that it's automated. And then you open up your parentheses, and this is where you're going to start defining your fields. So I have to kind of consult my table here. Sorry, this is going to be clunky, but it's kind of important that you see it. So it's got something called PID. PID, that is an int. It is not null. I guess if I wanted to be consistent, all my keywords should be uppercase. It doesn't actually matter. Also, this is a auto increment. You know, you can see that I can't type. This is officially the most you've seen me type with my sling on. I'm showing you how this works, though. I'm looking at the criteria of that table that I created, and I'm just translating it into this. The next field was called fname and lname and country. Those are all varchars. I don't know how long they are, so I'm just going to try and be generous. So I'll say fname varchar, we'll go like 64, lname varchar 64, and the last one is country varchar 64. And then the last piece here, after the last comma, I'm just going to say primary key. And in parentheses, I say the name of the primary key, which is p_id. And that. And then there's a closing set of parentheses. And then there's a semicolon after the big string. It's right, it's a big ugly string. Oftentimes people will press, they'll do line breaks in here just to make it more readable, like this. And I certainly have no problem with that. You see how much less hideous that is. So that is the SQL that'll create a table, and then I want to process that table, so I'll say result equals MySQLi query, pass it the DBC and the SQL, or die, and my die will be something like bad create table, and I will spit out the SQL showing you that technique that I've showed you before. And so that's a big bunch of stuff to write, and it's very specific, has to be perfect, otherwise it's not going to work. So I actually don't know whether this will work. I guess to be consistent with what I showed you earlier, I'll do a little echo here saying table created. That's just some little temporary message. So you see what I added? I added this. Also, I want to point out it's the same patterns we did here, right? Some SQL, I attempt to process it, either works or it doesn't, and then I move on. So let's see if this works. I just wrote it and I haven't tested it, so I don't know if it'll work. Fingers are crossed. So hopefully I just refresh this page and everything's good. And if it's not, well, I'll have some debugging to do, which is completely normal. That's why I said this is a difficult assignment, because I might have to debug some things. Anyways, I refresh and, oh, table created. You know, honestly, I'm pretty shocked when I write that much SQL and it actually works. So what that did, just to translate, so normally there's this thing called just create table. That's how you create a table. But you can't keep creating the same table over and over again, if that makes sense. So this if not exists, it creates the table if it needs to create it. If the table's already been created, then it won't create the table again. And so this now becomes just a junk message. And that, so the assignment is now almost completed. There's one more thing that I keep almost forgetting to do, but not quite. Alright, so there's one big principle happening here, and that is, right, so I've got this data validation happening. Imagine that someone goes to this form and none of the fields are there. Right, the way that this is written, if all of those fields were blank, this insert is still going to happen. Right, and so what's going to happen is the first time someone visits this page, literally, like if you visit this page and it's entirely blank, like this, I'll show you, and I insert it, like I get these error messages, but on the back end, I'm going to show you some mess. If I refresh this page, every time you press submit, even if the form fields are blank, it's inserting blank rows into the table, which is not good, right? Imagine someone just kind of spamming your table with thousands of rows of garbage. So we don't want that to happen. I mean, you ultimately can't do a lot to stop people from spamming, but if they're not even trying to insert rows, we shouldn't insert rows. So the answer is a flag. So I'm going to create a flag. I guess I'll set it to true. And so at the point where something's missing, I set that flag to false. And if that's missing, I set the flag to false. And if that's missing, I set the flag to false. And then, so this whole database stuff, we should only even worry about connecting to the database and doing anything with the database only in the event that everything's there. So I'll just say if flag is equal to true, then all this SQL goes in here. Right, so no reason to even interface with the database if the information's not there. And there is no else. So that was a little bit of a pretty big twist right at the end, but hopefully that makes sense. So I used flags. So let me show you the result now. So I added that create table statement, and I also made it so this thing's not just a garbage factory. Let me refresh this thing. How do I prove that this is working? So let's put in something like Keith and leave salary blank. So that should result in a non-insert. And I'm going to do that like, I just pressed it like 5 times. I'm sure there's a refresh button here, but I don't want to look for it. So I go to the persons table, I go to the end, and hopefully I don't see a bunch of Keiths in there. And you see I don't see a bunch of Keiths in there, so I'm saving myself a whole bunch of garbage by using a flag there. So like I said, Long Lab, it literally, so completing this and doing a decent job with it literally makes you apply so many of the principles that we've learned already in the class. But this is where it all starts to come together, and I think, so this is week 4, we're finishing up now, or wherever you're at with the week. Going forward as we start getting into some of the more fun tasks, more interesting tasks that we're going to do with PHP. So this is a big step towards getting towards our goal. So hope that hope you're able to follow this, and hope that the lab goes well for you, because there's some important concepts in here. Thanks for watching.